Welcome into episode 59 of the Level Flight podcast. We've got a full crew here today. The Jets are fresh off of a 5-2 win over the Detroit Red Wings. And I've got Brian and Elliott here to break it all down. Brian, how are we doing?
Good. I finished Christmas shopping yesterday, and I feel carefree.
Last minute. Wow. We're
No,
late,
I
man.
mean, I had a few things, and it's just, you go early enough in the day to pull a park, and you can usually avoid like the lineups. But no, I was out in and out of there by about 11 a.m. So we're good.
Very nice. Very nice. Dodged it. Elliott, how we doing?
We're good. A little busy, but yeah, Christmas shopping's all done. We're ready for, what is that, Monday? Yeah, that's Monday.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Should be fun. I love how we finished school and we're all like, oh, we're free. But then we kind of underestimate how busy the holiday season is.
Yeah.
It's been nuts this past week, but glad we're all here. Still able to do the episode. Let's get into it. We did a mailbag. Thank you to everyone who submitted questions. That'll be the back half of the episode. Some really interesting questions to get into, so can't wait to do that. But first, we've got games to recap. Starting with, again, maybe a statement win from the Jets. Another one of those wins that's labeled as one of the most impressive. Saturday night, South Asian Heritage Night inside Canada Life Center. The Jets decimate the Avalanche 6-2. No Cale Makar for Colorado, which you have to note because he's arguably their best player, if it's not Nathan MacKinnon. And Colorado's blue line definitely suffered. Winnipeg was just all over them on the forecheck. They couldn't really move the puck out of their zone. But yeah, 6-2 win. Brian, what were your thoughts on this game? People were stacking it up with that LA game a few weeks ago. Like, what's more impressive? Just a great showing from Winnipeg.
It's one of those games where you look at, and I feel like in years past, it's always been you're measuring yourself up in those games that you look at down the line of, oh, I remember when they beat such and such when they were at the top of the division. And I think too, what was impressive to me is normally those games, when you look back on them, they're a bit more, competitive.
Yeah.
It was not. It was very clearly one-sided.
Yeah.
I honestly think that you look at that, especially you look at the last, 20 or so games. I honestly think what you have to think about too is everyone's making a huge deal about this, and I think it's warranted. They just don't allow goals anymore.
Yeah.
It's like what they haven't allowed more than 2 goals in 20 or so games or something like that.
It's 3. They haven't allowed more than 3 since November 2nd, and they haven't allowed more than 2. They gave up 3 against Montreal, but 2 in regulation in a long time as well.
I believe it's no more than 3 in 21 games.
Yeah.
It's something, and 2, they've gone on a stretch a couple times where it's been like 5 or 6 games where they haven't allowed more than 2. So,
and that game where they gave up more than 3 was a 5-2 loss on the road to Vegas. I don't know if you guys remember that game. It was November 2nd. Like that's 2 weeks into the season. We're almost at 41 games. Like we're at 31 games played for the Jets right now. Like the defensive, it's ridiculous. And I think Laurent Brossoit's turned it around as well. We're going to talk about the Detroit game most recently, but the Jets defensive structure is a huge reason to do with that. That stat is just mind blowing to me. Elliott, this game against Colorado, what were your initial thoughts on the Jets just taking over the Central Division?
They did a really good job, I think, in this game of minimizing Nathan MacKinnon and things that he can do. He never really got going. The Jets made sure there was at least somebody covering him and then somebody else in the area at all times. They didn't let him wind up and try to. I think he only had 1 or 2 chances in the game, and I think they were late. I believe one of them was like in the third period where he really actually kind of wound up and got a full head of steam, was able to get into the zone and let something off. Other than that, the Jets were really good about minimizing chances. And I know that's been their MO, and it's Rick Bonus's MO, just minimizing the high danger chances, minimizing the stars. But it's what you need to do to win, especially in a star-driven league like the NHL at this high level. You need to keep minimizing the stars. And look what happened. They made sure Nathan MacKinnon was kept in check. He did. I'm pretty sure he was essentially a non-factor. I looked at his hockey stat card after the game. Like, he did nothing. It looked like he had barely played when he actually, I think he was out there still for 16, 17 minutes a night. So I think that the Jets did a really good job defensively. And then, they've just been really good about capitalizing on chances, and they've just been really good. I mean, we'll probably talk about the man of the hour, Gabe Vilardi, probably here in a minute. But I think it's just been, when they've won this year, it's been team games. It hasn't really been like, oh, Kyle Connor has a hat trick, or here's a 4-point night from one guy. It's been like the first line is good, or the fourth line contributes, or, oh, hey, these two sets of lines and this D pair did really well tonight, or like they're getting contributions from everybody, and it's normally not just one player or one line. It's a couple,
and that's
multiple people.
That's a sustainable way to win. Yeah. And like, that's the difference between last year's team and this year's team for me. This question of, oh, the Jets were this good last year and they were first in the division last year. Well, it was like you said, last year it felt more like Scheifele and Connor would just have 3 goals. And then when those guys went cold for January and February,
nothing
happened. Fell apart.
Yeah.
Right. Now it's like, if Gabe Vilardi all of a sudden cools off, well, Cole Perfetti could heat up again, or Nino Niederreiter from the third line could get his consistent 20 goals in a season and pick it up.
Kyle Connor will come back from injury.
Connor comes back. Yeah. Like,
the fourth line contributes. Like, I don't think we need to underestimate the fourth line.
Scored. What?
Well,
yeah.
We'll get there.
We're
not there yet.
When we talk about the Red Wings game, we talk about the fourth line, but that's the other thing. I don't think we need to undersell a line anymore. I think the entire forward core, no matter who it seems they bring in, seems to be like. And I never understood, and I don't want to bring back the 11-7 argument here, but I don't think AJF has played bad enough for the Jets to go 11-7. Like, I actually think in his stint this time, he's looked good, and he's actually like he's looked good enough with the fourth line, just generating chances. And I think that's where I don't want to be also that guy too, where it's, oh, the fourth line, the grind line, that's where all the energy comes from.
That's what they're doing, though.
But they've been the energy line for the Jets. It seems to be they get minutes, and they get the big minutes when the Jets aren't really generating much, and the first line kind of gets off to a little bit of a slow start. Rick Bowness throws out the fourth line. They seem to either have a really good defensive shift and then throw it off to the second or third line, and then they go down the other end in the offensive zone and they generate some chances, or it's the other way around. Like, the fourth line goes out and generates some chances. So they've just been really good otherwise.
Yeah, that fourth line, I mean, in years past, it's been a win if the fourth line just like got the puck deep and gave the first line a breather. Yeah, like breaks even. This year is not the case. Morgan Barron looks really good as well. David Gustafson's finally putting together a solid stretch of NHL games. Axel Jonsson-Fjällby scored against Detroit. But first, we got to get to that Montreal game, the Barron Bowl, Morgan versus Justin. And it ends with a Justin Barron OT winner. I found that just poetic. It was great. Lots of Canadians fans in this one, in the building. Lots of red. But I don't have much else to say about this game except for the special teams, which we spent a lot of airtime on last week. But Brian, I know you wrote a takeaways piece from this one, so I'll let you break down what you saw in the Canadiens' loss.
Well, my 3 takeaways were, 1, Gabe Vilardi remains undefeated.
Mm-hmm.
He is just, this little stretch that he's been on since coming back from injury is just unreal. But I also brought up, as we said, the special teams. But my biggest thing was, you're coming off a massive win against Colorado, the division-leading Colorado Avalanche. And we've seen this before, where you've shown that you can beat the hell out of anyone in the league. And then you lose to like Montreal for the second time this season in winnable games. Like, the thing that got me too is I laughed at this stat. Like, because it ended up being like, because I made a whole point too, where it's like, I don't feel as bad about this loss if you come out and just run Detroit over. Which they did.
Yeah.
But like, the whole thing is, you should really, at the very least, make it clear that you're the better team against teams that are lower than you in the standings. I didn't think they did that against Montreal.
Mhm.
But my favorite thing was the stat that got me was Jake Allen won this game. His last win came against the Jets in Montreal when they won in a shootout on November 28th.
Oh man.
So yeah, I don't have much to say about it. Like it was another situation though where a good power play or two could have quite literally just won the game for them, but it didn't. Again, they didn't have a chance in the Detroit game, so I guess this is the time to actually talk about it though, where they didn't have a chance to show it in the Detroit game, but something's gotta break here with the the power play.
Yeah.
Like,
And
I
we'll
don't
get
know if
into
it's
it
like
later in the episode.
yeah,
But they did make a change. And we'll talk about whether or not we like the change. I think something needed to change, especially after this Montreal game, and that's what he did. But the power play has been a problem. But like you said, I'm almost willing to discard this game based off like the 3 games around it. Like
Yeah.
LA, Colorado, and Detroit. They just made these teams look like AHL teams. And they lost to Montreal. Whatever. Like
You're gonna lose
like you said,
games.
a good power play or two, they would have won. They went to OT, they got a point. I'm willing to kind of throw it away just based off of the 3 games around it. But
I would have been
yeah.
more concerned had Detroit put up more of a fight.
Right. Yeah.
But
That'd
yeah,
be back-to-back games was kind of
against teams that are significantly lower than you in the standings.
yeah, right.
So
Yeah. Let's get into that Detroit game. We don't have to spend too much time on that Montreal game. The power play was the main thing. Elliott, I'll start with you on the Detroit game. I just want to get the hockey stat card up. We love the hockey stat card account, and Gabriel Vilardi is just, if you're on YouTube, you can see it. Gabriel Vilardi is just on fire. Actually, Hudson Fialbi's up there after a 2-point night. But Elliott, what were your takeaways from the Jets just rolling through the Detroit Red Wings?
I thought it was a little bit more of an interesting game just because I thought the first couple minutes of the first period, the Jets were really good. I thought they were all over Detroit. I thought they were showing that they were the better team. They were taking initiative. They were taking it to the Red Wings. And then it kind of went away. And I was a little disappointed that they didn't capitalize on all that momentum. But then they came back throughout the rest of the game and they just
The second period, man.
Yeah. Yeah. This team
just wasn't even close.
This team, I don't know what it is. I know they like to play low event first periods, and I think that really works against some teams. But like they have been, I don't know what it is, and I'd love to know and we'll get into it with the power play strategy thing. I don't know if this is a strategy thing or a player, like just a player mind ready thing. But I don't know what it is. If it's Rick Bones' strategy of let's play low event first periods and then just bring it to the opponent in the second period, or if
lull them into a false sense of security.
Yeah, or is it Rick Bones going, okay, let's come at them hard, and then the Jets don't do it in the first period, and it just ends up being low event, and then he goes and screams at them in the locker room, going, where's this, where's that? Can we fight? Can we do this? Da da da. And they come out and kill teams.
Yeah,
but that's where it is.
Like,
that's where I
with
don't
the LA
understand.
game.
Yeah,
like you're down 2-0 after 1, and then you come out and you're like, all right, I guess we'll show up now. Like
yeah, and that's the part that I don't understand, because there have been games this year, not as many as the flat. I'm not going to say flat first periods, because it also seems like sometimes the Jets aren't trying to do too much in the first period. At times, that's where I think it's kind of a strategy thing. But there's this weird, like, I don't know, where like we've seen a couple of games, the Jets come out flying in the first period and then they look great. And so I don't know if it's, again, a strategy thing that Bones is trying to do against certain teams, like, hey, let's come out hard against this team. Let's play low event against this team because it works better strategic wise. But I other than that, I thought the Jets played really good, and I can't really say much else about it. I don't really think there was really anybody that I was like, oh, you had a bad game or anything like that.
On the low event first period topic, it's interesting because it's really boring to watch. Like it really is. Like I'm not gonna lie, but it's better than the Jets getting absolutely shelled in the first period. Like nothing happening is better. Like sure, you could label it a slow start, but like the Jets after one were winning 1-0. So it's
Yeah.
like it really a slow, like, yeah, it was low event, but the Jets just Neil Pionk like fluttered a shot from the point, somehow went in off of Jeff Petrie. And I guess they're winning, right? But like I said, it's not like they're getting shelled and then Neil Pionk scores a lucky one. It's like nothing is happening, and then that goal just kind of happens, and it's like, oh, okay, we're awake now. And then the Jets in that second period, they just rolled. We in the press box, we sit on that end of the rink where the Jets shoot in the second period. And I leaned over and said to Carter Brooks, like, the puck has been down here the whole time. Like, whether they've been cycling it, Detroit hasn't gotten the puck back really much at all. Winnipeg was just all over their defense, and it was fun to watch. They were just cycling the puck to no end. And that one pass, Gabriel Vilardi scored another goal in this game. The Macarena, people were doing it, but it was Vilardi. It was a tap in because Cole Perfetti comes off the half wall, and just the vision. We've talked about it many times, but just hits Vilardi for a backdoor tap in. Like, if I was standing backdoor, I could have tapped that in. Like, that's how you know Cole Perfetti is really freaking good at hockey.
Well,
because if I was standing backdoor, I could have scored that goal. But yeah,
with Vilardi too, is not only does he just know where to be, he is also the one who can dole out those passes. Like him delaying a little so Ehlers can get open beside the net. Like, that's just it's great hockey IQ, but he also put the pass exactly where it needed to be in order for him to just roof it. Like, it's just, he is such a smart player. And I mean, it's fun. I mean, I'll go as far to say it's very fun to dunk on Kings fans. But my favorite thing though is the constant updating of Vilardi now having more points than Pierre-Luc Dubois
by all main media too.
Games.
All main media. It's not just like Winnipeg local media or LA local media. It's like all over. If you go on Twitter, it's everybody's talking about it, which I think is the best part.
Is a lot of Kings fans though are seeing it and they're like, this is an all-time blunder here. And like, what I will say is I do think that in terms of, actual talent, not the stuff that shows up, Dubois has the ability to be way better than what he's doing right now. But it just looks so much worse because of one, how good Vilardi's doing, and two, that contract differential there. Like, it's just, you look and you're like, all right, so 15 less games, more points for Vilardi. You're like, ooh, that's a nice little stat to look at.
Yeah, but to further your point, like, there are Kings fans that I'm seeing on Twitter that are like kicking themselves, and they like are almost like, we knew. Like, Vilardi, he showed this promise. He broke out last year. When the trade happened, they're like, okay, you're shooting high. You're going to get that third line center, I guess, because that's what Dubois is for the Kings right now. And then Vilardi just absolutely lights it up. He's got 10 points in his last 4 games. And I wrote a takeaways piece on this game. Let's get this. Appreciate the hockey stat cards. They are fantastic. But I wrote a takeaways piece on this game. Yes, give them a follow. I wrote a takeaways piece on the Detroit game, and my number one takeaway was Gabriel Vilardi's making national headlines. Like, it took a game against an original 6 opponent in its own time slot. Like, there were 3 NHL games last night, and the Jets were one of them. And there was a game at 9 p.m. So it was like one of 2 games that you could have watched. It was Jets, Wings, and like Islanders, someone else. It took Islanders,
that Caps, I think.
Yeah. So it took that for people to notice the fact that he's been dominating, but people are starting to take notice. And that contract differential and the trade right now.
Are we at the point? I know it's 10 points in 4 games, and he's played like a total of 13, 14 games.
He's got 13
points. Yeah. Are we already going to be talking about him taking that next step from his jump last year? Like, has he elevated even more? Are we at that point
already?
Yeah.
No, I think we're there, and I believe that the stretch after the Christmas break, because he's had essentially, since he's come back, like, they've played a fairly consistent stretch of games here where there's not like big breaks or anything. Like, at most it's been like two days, I think. I think having that couple days there, and then after Christmas. If he comes back and continues this role, because like that's the thing, like over the Christmas break, you're also like you're allowed to practice on your own, but the teams aren't allowed to hold any formal practices. So like you have to separate yourself entirely. Because I know wasn't it the Leafs last year who got penalized for it
Yeah.
because they held a skate on like Boxing Day.
On
but
Boxing Day.
I honestly think that if he comes back with that little break totally away from the ice and continues to dominate, which I have no reason to doubt that, they will, especially that top line has just been unreal.
Yeah.
And I think that we are seeing the evolution of him as a player going from, prospect with, great, outlook to this guy is taking a step here in LA last year, and then seeing it this year where he's a legitimate top line, national headline maker. Like it's,
and when he was hurt, like I said it, and I didn't think it would come true to this extent, but he was hurt, and I was saying, people are kind of underrating him. Like he was the main piece. Alex Iafallo was playing great, and people were like, okay, like Vilardi will come back, like whatever. People weren't really taking that into account. I didn't think he'd come back and put up 10 points in 4 games, but
yeah.
I did think he was going a little under the radar, especially when he missed all that time. Before we go to break, I do want to bring up the analytics for this top line. You brought it up. They are absolutely crushing it right now. I've got it here. This is all from Money Puck. Ehlers, Scheifele, Vilardi. 70.1% expected goals percentage, Corsi percentage of 66.2%, and they're outscoring their opponents 9-2. Their goals for per 60 as a line is number 1 in the league for forward lines that have played at least 60 minutes together. The Corsi percentage is number 2 behind Carolina, and they played against Carolina. We talked about it. All they do is throw shots at the net, but Corsi percentage number 2 behind Martinic, Stahl, and Fast, that line for Carolina. And their expected goals percentage of 70.1 is also number 2 in the league of lines that have played at least 60 minutes to Hyman, McDavid, Nugent Hopkins. So they're doing pretty well. And we don't have to have the conversation yet on where Kyle Connor slots back in because we're a long ways away from that. But soon enough, we might have to have that conversation because this top line you can't break them up.
You cannot touch
any
it.
circumstance. No. It's unbelievable.
Since Vilardi's come back, and then it's been 5 games since this line specifically has been together. They have been the best line in the league.
Yes,
bar none. Like there's absolutely no discussion there. Like it's unreal what they've done. And if they even a semblance of what they're doing over this little 5-game stretch here, like you can't expect them to play, this level of hockey. Like you're not getting, every 4 games, Vilardi's putting up, 10 points and,
Right.
Scheifele and Ehlers are having like back-to-back 3-point games every game. But if they put up like even just like a little bit less, they're still going to be like untouchable.
Yeah. It's unbelievable that the Jets have kind of stumbled into this, especially with the Kyle Connor injury. And we brought it up. The analytics in the very, very small sample size of Connor, Scheifele, Vilardi was unreal for the first 2 games and half a period. And then here we are. The analytics for this line are incredible. Maybe Gabriel Vilardi's the key. Maybe Nikolai Ehlers is the key. Like he's on fire as well. It's kind of flying under the radar. Maybe Mark Scheifele.
I think it's Mark Scheifele. Personally, I think it's Mark Scheifele, but
I
he's
just
the
think
common denominator.
That Vilardi though provides good defensive impact because let's be real, you're not getting great defensive impact out of Scheifele. You weren't ever going to get good defensive impact out of Connor. Ehlers has slipped a bit in the last few years defensively, but it doesn't matter now because they're playing good enough defensively because Vilardi is able to, kind of rein everything in, but it doesn't matter. They are just blowing their opponents out of the water because they don't leave the offensive zone.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
I just think it's
last
the
word
biggest
before break.
Yeah, I just think it's the biggest thing is what you just said, Brian. The Jets have been very about that first line needing to be the offensive driver, and they want to throw as much offense. This is finally the line that's doing that. It's finally the line of, I'm fine with not putting I know Vilardi is a defensive player, but I'm fine with them not playing very good defensively in terms of metrics if they're just going to keep putting up points. Because then who cares? We're just
right.
I don't want to be that team because the Jets have been really good 5-on-5 defensively. But like if we end up in a game, I feel really good about the Jets winning a 5-4, like a 5-4 game. Most years I'd say, oh, the Jets are probably going to lose. No, I feel pretty good about the Jets if the game's tied at 4, that somebody on the first line is probably going to put up another set of points and someone's going to score. So,
yeah. Well, the game being tied at 4, I don't know how many games this year are going to be tied at 4, man. They don't give up more than 3.
That's what I'm saying.
maybe tied at 2. Although it was tied at 2, they lost to Montreal. But I get what you're saying, and I agree. Like the top line is just able to cover up offensive holes from other lines, but right now they're getting offense from other lines too, and they look like one of the best teams in the West.
Which, before we move on to break, I have 2 quick points. Fourth line in
right.
Detroit
Yes, we didn't even talk.
We got caught on the Vilardi conversation, but 2 goals from the fourth line.
Yeah.
And then also Laurent Brossoit, 3rd consecutive really good start.
Yeah.
And I wrote a piece a couple weeks back where it was, or I guess last week, that he needs to be more consistent for them to really, use him in these situations. And there he is. So,
yep. And he's got another start coming up. The Jets have a back-to-back against the Wild on the 30th and then New Year's Eve. So he's going to start one of those games, and he's been great, like you said. Let's head to break. We're going to hear a word from our sponsor, DraftKings. This is episode 59 of the Level Flight podcast. Stick around for after the break.
Bet the action on the ice with DraftKings Sportsbook. Download the app now and use code THPN. New customers can get $150 instantly in bonus bets for betting just $5 on hockey. That's code THPN, only on DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NHL. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.1800gambler.net. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-777 or visit ccpg.org. Please play responsibly. On behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort in Kansas, licensee partner Golden Nugget Lake Charles. 21 plus, age varies by jurisdiction, void in Ontario. Bonus bets expire 168 hours after issuance. See dkng.com/hockey for eligibility and deposit restrictions, terms, and responsible gaming resources. NHL and the NHL Shield are registered trademarks of the National Hockey League. Copyright NHL 2023, all rights reserved.
And welcome back into episode 59 of the Level Flight podcast. Thanks once again to DraftKings for sponsoring this episode. And we did a mailbag. You guys asked questions. We're going to answer them. A few great questions. A lot of them, or 2 of them at least, the first 2 we're going to talk about, focused on trades. People are already looking ahead. This team has people excited for the trade deadline and what they could potentially add. First question is from Andrew, a fellow CMU student. Thank you, Andrew, for submitting questions. We know Andrew very well. But he asked, what are some players that the Jets could target in a trade that would serve as those under-the-radar good trades for the Jets, like DeMello and Nemesnikov? Before I throw it to you guys, I will just say, even the Niederreiter trade, I'd loop into that. Like, no one really, an in-division top 6 forward, no one really penciled in Niederreiter as a trade target, and then that just kind of came out of left field. And that, like, I've been shocked by the deadline deals that the Jets have done. I haven't really been able to hone in on what they're predicting, but we are still going to provide some under the radar targets that we would like to see. Elliott, I'll start with you. Is there any team player that you are looking at that might be not talked about as much on the Twitter circles or wherever that may be?
Yeah, I mean, we've heard about the Flames, and we know the Blues are now a potential target, and obviously Nashville is going to be. I think Nashville would probably be my pick if you're going to go in division, just because no one's really talked about them. They're not really in the playoff race. You're not going to talk about Arizona because they're playing well and they're probably going to be in for a wild card spot. And yeah, I mean, it's hard to say, at least at this point. Normally around game 41, when you get into that month before the trade deadline, you can kind of figure out lots of teams I would actually say are still in the race. Another team I guess I would mention that would be an Eastern Conference. I guess we've heard a little bit about them, I think, and we've seen that both GMs have been at games and sending scouts and stuff. I think the Flyers are probably, I would say, if you're going to bet on anybody for the Jets to trade with at this point, if there was a line for who they're going to trade with, it's probably going to be the Flyers, just because they've been looking at back and forth with one another. So that'd probably be my pick. I don't really have a player, just because there's not really much on the, like, personally, unless you're looking at Elias Lindholm, there's nobody really else on the trade market at this current time. No one's really been made available, because most teams, again, we're 31 games into the year, around just over 30 games for most teams. Most teams are still thinking about, oh, are we in it? Can we go on a run? Like, so I would say once we hit that 40, like about the halfway mark, maybe a little bit more, that's when you can really start to see if teams have kind of decided where their season's going to go. I think it's still a little bit early.
Brian?
Yeah, I'm going to further that, where I was kind of looking at it when you were saying it, Elliott. I think it's 26 teams are within 3 games of 500 hockey, which I can't recall at any point recently that there's been this many teams. Like the parity this year is wild. I will say, like, there's very clear, like, oh, they're outperforming, they're underperforming, but there's still, like, the wins are either there or they're not. But like, you're looking at essentially just the Blue Jackets, the Sabres, the Ducks, the Senators, the Blackhawks, and the Sharks are the only teams that are, I think, 4 or more below. And I'm going to take the safe route too, where I honestly don't think there's enough out there that once teams start dropping totally out of the race, then you start, you're able to look more clearly at, their contracts and, where, these teams are looking to go in the future, what their direction looks like. If they got a bunch of young guys, they're going to probably want to move out some veterans for some draft picks and stuff like that. So I think we're about a month or two. I think that, January is that sort of barometer for teams being like, okay, yeah, we're coming down the stretch here to the deadline. We're not in this anymore. Or some teams will be like kind of in it, but not, like the Blues a few years ago, when they dealt Stastny to the Jets. Like, it's when they have
Predators
that
were in
level
it last
of
year.
that self-awareness though, of like, this is not what we're looking for.
Right.
We might as well make the move now because we're not going to make any noise. So no, I think we're going to look, probably, I would say mid-January is going to be that point when suddenly those under the radar targets start looking a little bit more reasonable.
Yeah. And a team, I'm going to throw out a team and players from the team that might, like, you didn't mention them, Brian. People aren't really mentioning them because I think they're still kind of holding on to what last year was, but they were so obviously a regression candidate, and they are regressing, and that's the Seattle Kraken. They outscored their problems last year, and when teams outscore their problems and the problems don't get fixed, this is what happens. They failed to outscore them 2 years in a row, and they're below 500 now. The Pacific is stacked, especially with the Oilers finally looking like themselves now. You've got LA, Vegas, Edmonton, Vancouver is like a top 5 team in the NHL. So I doubt they're going to be even close to the playoffs. Maybe the second wildcard spot, but I could see them as a team that looks to sell. And they have a lot of interesting candidates, especially up front. I mean, we know the Jets like to trade for guys with term. Oliver Bjorkstrand has 3 years left on his contract. That was a guy last year I think I wrote a piece on that could be like a guy that the Seattle was good last year though. So they weren't really in a selling position, but his analytics are incredible. Yanni Gourde has 2 years left at $5 million. He could fill that 2C role. Alexander Wenberg has 1 year left. He wouldn't really fill a 2C role. He's more of a bottom 6 guy.
I like the Gourde conversation.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. Gourde would be more of like a 2-way 2C guy, $5 million, 2 more years. And then there's 3 kind of middle 6 targets that I like here. And that's Kyler Yamamoto, Thomas Tatar, and Ellie Tolvanen all are expiring at the end of the year. Tolvanen and Yamamoto are actually RFAs, so you could even retain them. But those are guys that if you wanted to improve your depth, I think you could do it for cheap. And I think you could do it on a Seattle team that has to pay Matty Beniers soon. I might not be looking to pay these depth guys who have outperformed that. Like Ellie Tolvanen last year was picked up off of waivers and then played great for Seattle. And he could be kind of a scoring boost to the bottom six. Not that the Jets need it, but it's something to keep an eye on for sure because they could add to that depth, and Seattle has a lot to provide, especially since I don't think they're going to be anywhere close to a playoff spot come trade deadline season.
Yeah, I think
Go ahead,
that's the
Elliott.
biggest. No, just quickly. I think the biggest thing to take away from this, us answering this question, is one, it's too early, and two, no matter if teams think that if GMs, no matter if they think their team is underperforming or overperforming, they will still be pushing for the playoffs at this point. It's like Brian said, once we hit January and we start getting towards that month out from the deadline, month and a half, that's when teams actually start to decide, okay, are we all in? Are we out? Or you're just the Nashville Predators and you trade away Nino Niederreiter and then you're still in the playoff race with the Jets for some reason because, again, you're overperforming. And that's the thing. Teams may sell and then they overperform. Like the Predators sold last year at the deadline, and then the Jets were in a playoff race with them all the way up until like game 80. Like it was nuts.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
we'll see.
And I will say on the too early thing, GMs are also kind of copying the NBA a little bit and making their deadline move like 3 weeks before the actual deadline. Like trade deadline day has become just nothing. Like it's the trades are happening earlier. The Jets added Nemesnikov on deadline day. That was one of the biggest trades that happened that day. But they traded for Niederreiter 10 days before. Because why wait for trade deadline and then you only get your player for 18 games before the playoffs when you can make the trade 2 weeks prior and get them for 30 games, right? Or 25 games or whatever the case may be. So I do agree that it's a little early, but I honestly think GMs are going earlier and earlier with their deals. So we might have to adjust as people who are on the lookout. The next question is also a trade target, but this one, we talked about it last week a little bit with Pavel Buchnevich. I'm not sure if that's your guys' answer for the question, but from Magin, assuming Chevy goes out and rewards the team for their season, who's your ideal deadline ad and where would you slot them into the lineup? Andrew's question was more of like an under the radar, looking at depth kind of thing. This question I'm treating as like, what would their big swing be? Like what would my ideal big swing be? I'm going to go first on this one. Travis Konechny. The issue with this one is the Flyers are good. Like the Flyers are in a playoff spot and like well over 500. They're not rebuilding. So I don't know how possible it is, but they might be a team that's overperforming and comes back down to earth. But shout out to Jacob Stoller. We've had him on the podcast many times. Go check him out. But he was the one that kind of pointed me in this direction, saying Konechny would be a great ad, and I could not agree more. Konechny would be a fantastic ad. I think he has, I believe he has term as well. I'm checking that right now, but he would be like an immediate add into that top six. He has term till 2025, so he's got term. He would be an ideal add into that top six. If Philly is in a position to sell, that would be just a great ad for Winnipeg, and it's my ideal one. We're gonna get into another one with our next mailbag question that I think would be up there for me as well and would fill a pretty clear need. But who would your guys' ideal ads be? Brian, I'll start with you.
I still think Buchnevich is right up there with me, but I've kind of pivoted a little bit purely based on just adding a winger, knowing when Connor's coming back. It feels if there's a level of redundancy to it, and I understand, like it's hard to obviously project that, but I would say adding like a Buchnevich and then running like Connor comes back and you run, you do move Perfetti back to center in that scenario. And I think that would work, but it's a level of if they're consistently going to be putting Perfetti on the wing, I think the big swing would be another second line center, as we have this conversation all the time. And in this situation, I'd say the best, center on the market is you're probably looking at an Elias Lindholm.
Yeah.
And I mean, as we talked about, like there might be these guys that suddenly pop up on the market, a couple weeks before the deadline, being like, though the team has given up on the season, and you're not swinging for these guys that are under the radar, like but if you're going big, Lindholm has been the top center on the market for the last year, and he just hasn't gone anywhere. But it sounds like things aren't going anywhere with the Flames either. So it would take a lot. It sounds like I saw a report that they're looking for a Dubois style return. So
Teams aren't doing that after how it turned out.
Absolutely not. So that might be a wait and see. But I mean, if you add that level of impact and then you bring Connor back and then you have that top line, then you have Connor, Lindholm, Perfetti. And that's also Kyle Connor on that line. He doesn't have to worry about a damn thing defensively. Perfetti, great defensively. Lindholm, good defensively. And it's Connor can just kind of do his own thing. He would be free to just, float around looking for shots. So I think, and then obviously they've been buried a little bit lately. That third line, though, still has the ability to be a very strong line, especially if teams are going to have to match up even stronger against those top two. And then the fourth line's producing. So if you add in that second line center and then you bring Connor back, suddenly you've got essentially two first lines. So
and if you added Lindholm and then Connor came back and you ran that second line, your fourth line would be Iafallo, Nemesnikov, Barron.
Yeah,
like that's a fourth line that you play. Like those guys aren't playing 7 minutes a night. Like you're rolling four lines. Yeah. Elliott.
Yeah, I think it has to be a center. I don't again, it's hard to say. I guess Travis Konechny, he does play center, correct? He's
a winger. In this scenario, I'd move Perfetti to the middle.
Yeah.
And then
okay. So either way, I think a center, Lindholm is probably the target, especially with if Connor was in the lineup, then maybe you think about a winger, but I don't really know where a winger would fit. I think you think about a bottom six winger, maybe, depending on where you want depth. But I think Lindholm is your big swing. If another target becomes available, obviously you take a look at it depending on who it is and what team they're on. But I think the Jets need to put a center out. And I think for right now, unless the first line completely tanks, you have to roll with the first line. And then, Kyle Connor then is on the second line. And I think for one of Connor's better seasons was him playing with Blake Wheeler, a pure passer who is just looking to feed the shooter. And I think as much as Kyle Connor still figured it out with Mark Scheifele still likes to shoot, and he's not always looking to pass. And obviously Ehlers is always looking to shoot. I think that's the perfect scenario for Kyle Connor, is to come back on that second line and they find a center that is just good, a two-way player, good defensively. He's going to contribute offensively somewhat. And then you put Perfetti on the wing, and then Perfetti's just feeding Kyle Connor all day. It's shot after shot. Perfetti's finding that would be the ultimate. I think if Kevin Cheveldayoff wanted to show the team and wanted to show the fan base that he's committed to winning and he is going all in for a cup, not just signing obviously Scheifele and Hellebuck to those long-term extensions, I think would be for him to spewing absolutely massive on a second line center. And load up on the top six lines. Now, obviously, we all have our opinions as well. I think the Jets also need to look for a top four defenseman. I think that's also a target that they need. I personally think so. I still think that they need that, but I think a second line center is obviously the bigger issue. I think if you can get an extra defenseman that fits in the top four, I think that's you get an A+ from me.
Yeah, and I was going to bring up the defenseman thing before we moved on. I think with the defense, if you're making a big swing, you can stay with the Flames. I mean, there's Chris Tanev, who is just an absolute warrior on the ice. He's 33. He's pending UFA, so that's more of a rental.
Played
But
in Manitoba at one point for the Manitoba
Yes.
Moose.
Exactly. Yes. Bring him home.
I listen.
No,
I witnessed him play, and I was like, yeah, this guy could be something. And now here we are.
you knew.
I knew.
You knew.
You're a scout.
Um,
Holy.
oh yeah. But I honestly think sneaky. No, I haven't seen anyone say it yet, but Rasmus Anderson from the Flames has 3 years left at 4.5 million. He's 27 years old. He's their top defenseman. He's on their top pairing. And if it was a deal similar to the Jacob Chikrin one that Ottawa did with Arizona, that would interest me. Maybe a little bit less because Chikrin at the time was 23, Anderson is 27. So you're getting Chikrin for his prime years. You're getting Anderson at kind of the tail end of his prime. Maybe the rest of his contract would be just fine from 27 to 30. But that would be a huge swing, and he would immediately be Josh Morrissey's partner for at least the next 3 years, if not longer. And it seems to be like those 3 years there. Like Nino Niederreiter signed for 3 years. Creating a bit of a window here. Vilardi's here for the next 2 years. Perfetti's up. I'm sure they'll go longer than a year with him. Maybe Perfetti will want to bridge. But we'll see. Maybe they're like making a bit of a 3-year window here, and Rasmus Anderson would fit that perfectly. If they traded for him, their decor would be loaded. Even better than it is now, which is one of the best in the league at suppressing chances at 5-on-5.
Yeah.
Anyways, let's move on to the last question from Jeff at Nick Smith on Twitter. What's a potential offer the Jets could make to Minnesota for Joel Eriksson Ek if the Wild are well out of the playoff race in February? I will say the Wild have really turned it around after they fired and then hired John Hines. The coaching bump has resulted in their goaltenders playing like the 2 best goaltenders in the league, as it always does. Show me a good coach and I'll show you a good goalie. That's always the saying. But what are your guys' thoughts on Joel Eriksson Ek? I know we just talked a lot about second line centers. Eriksson Ek has, I think, 6 years left on his contract, and he's 26 years old. So this would be, from a divisional opponent, tough to acquire. But what are your guys' thoughts on him potentially being an option if the Wild are well out of it, Brian?
It feels kind of like far-fetched because they've developed him into their top line center, who has been, just a great scorer over the last couple of years here. But that's really it. Like, it's been about 2 years here where he's been legitimately like he had 26 goals in 21-22, 23 last year, and he's on pace for it this year. But essentially, up until recently, he was, that 40 to 50 point guy. And I think that he has evolved, and he will be a guy who's probably going to put up 20 to 30 goals, 70 to 80 points. But I think what you said it best, where it was they have a 6-year, remainder on that. So firstly, if you're acquiring him, you are also acquiring, the remainder of 6 years at 5 point. What was it here?
5.35, I want to say.
5.25.
2.5. Oh.
And I will say this is the last year that anyone can really trade for him, because he's got starting next year a bunch of trade protection. So it feel like I think it would take a lot from that standpoint alone, because obviously there's the term thing, but he's 26. So you're acquiring, he's in his prime now probably, and he's gonna just kind of click along at this pace. So you'd get a decent, production level. But what you're also looking at, though, is the fact that if you're acquiring that much term, you're going to have to throw a lot at the Wild to actually convince them, because that's their number one center. So they need to, first of all, be totally out of it, because you're not trading the guy playing between, Boldy and Kaprizov.
Right.
And I think what's interesting too is he would be the number 2 center here, and it would be phenomenal. But I don't think I've ever seen a level of interest in the Wild making that move.
Yeah. Elliott?
Yeah, I think for me, just to kind of sum all that up, I think there's too many factors for it to really be a possibility. Like, like I said last week with the Pavel Buchnevich trade, as much as Buchnevich is probably a little bit more attainable, it's still an in-division opponent, so the price is going to be up. Then it's a player with a long contract with term, which I know the Jets like, but then the Wild probably like that because they've got Kaprizov and Boldy. And then it's just going to be a larger price for everything. And then the Wild have also not shown any interest in, wanting to ship him out. So I think someone like a Joel Eriksson is probably out of the range. I forgot to say this when we were talking about other trade targets. I know the Jets like term, but I think the term they like and they seem to want to trade for is guys with 2 years left in their deal. They come in with the remainder of the year, and then they're still under contract for the following year. So if they can't get an extension done, they at least get another full season with the player. So for me, guys that are 2 years, and I think maybe they'd push it to 3 years, but guys are with 2 or 3 years left on their deal, I think are targets for the Jets. Anybody more than that, I think anybody more or less than that, unless it's a depth bottom 6 player, I don't think the Jets are going to be targeting. I think if they're going to swing big, it's somebody with 2 or 3 years left. If they add anybody else, it'll be someone with a year left that's making minimum or close to minimum money and is just going to be a 4th line, maybe bottom 6 press box option. Other than that, it'll be guys with 2 or 3 years left. And that's where I think that with Eriksson having 6 years left with term, I don't think it's just going to be a possibility.
Yeah. I agree with the possibility stuff. This question asks for like kind of a potential offer. So you guys touched on the potential of it, and I agree with what you said. An offer would probably start at minimum with one of Barlow, Lambert, or Lucius and a 1.
Yeah.
Probably plus a mid-round pick, probably plus another prospect. Like
probably
again,
a roster player though, too.
Yeah, I was going to say there's probably a roster player.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
I don't know.
Like the Wild are like Kaprizov is his prime, is in his prime now, and this is like their time. So they're to move off of Eriksson would be tough. And then again, trading in division, I doubt Kevin Cheveldayoff wants to trade Brad Lambert to the Minnesota Wild, and then he hits his full potential and terrorizes the Jets for the next 10 years, So in division is tough, especially with top line centers that are making that are on a good contract for the next 6+ years. You have to trade a lot to get that player. If Eriksson played on an Eastern Conference team, I'd say it was more likely, especially with how bad the Wild have been to start the year. But him being in division kind of makes it unattainable in my eyes. But yeah, that was it. That was the mailbag section. Thank you to everyone who submitted questions. We really enjoy, talking trade targets. And people want to know, because maybe this is the year that the Jets swing big. Who knows? But there are a few quick hitter topics that we can't go without saying here. We said it on early in the episode, but Perfetti and Iafallo have been swapped on the power play, but the Jets didn't have any power play opportunities against Detroit. Just quick, like few sentences. What are your guys' initial thoughts on that swap, Brian?
I think personnel wise, it's a good swap to make, but I honestly don't know if personnel is the issue. I think it's, the tactics of how the power play moves and how they, not even just moving the puck, because you can move the puck and still stand still, which is a lot of what they do.
Right.
I think there needs to be a lot more fluidity to it, and it's going to take more than I think moving, players around. I think it helps having such a good passer in Perfetti, but I need to see more of it. But I think Brad Lauer needs to really sit down and think about how they can change, actual tactics.
Yep.
I think just to kind of piggyback off of what Brian said, Rick Bowness obviously came out after the game and talked about what he had to say about the power play, and he talked about movement and not just puck movement. He talked about player movement, and that's where I'm starting to think it's not a system issue when it comes to the power play. I'm starting to think it's a personnel issue where it's player types and just their thoughts and what they personally want to do on the power play like Mark Scheifele kind of just wants to stand around and shoot, and Perfetti kind of just wants to stand around and pass. They don't really want to move. So I think it's actually a player thing, and it's like a mental player thing. I don't think it's really a play style or it's a system thing. I think it's just the way that the players are personally playing when it comes to the power play. If that makes any sense. Does that make sense? Kind of where I'm
that makes
getting
sense.
at. Yeah.
And, yeah, and it's like what they're good at and their strengths. Are they playing to it? Not really sure. Like I think Mark Scheifele would be best suited in the bumper. I think Ehlers would best be suited where Scheifele is right now on that left flank, because he does that thing where he curls and just attacks with speed, and a lot gets generated off of that. And I think Perfetti would be best on the right flank where Ehlers is right now. So my takeaway from this swap is I want to see how Perfetti is on the right flank on the second unit when the second unit gets a chance, because that's a facilitator role, and we know how good his passing is. We know how good his vision is. If he's able to set people up on that second unit, set up Pionk for one-timers through the seam, the Jets may have found something here, and I wouldn't be shocked if their power play goes to Vilardi down low. We know how good he is around the net. Scheifele in the bumper, Perfetti on the right flank, Ehlers on the left flank, and then Morrissey up top. I think that would be how I would run the power play, and how I think the players would best be playing to their strengths, especially in Ehlers' case. I don't think he's a one-timer guy that stands there. You got to use his speed somehow. But yeah, we'll see how these units look. Alex Iafallo's been good in the bumper spot as well. So as long as they can get going, something had to change, and I don't completely hate it. Outside of the Winnipeg Jets, the last thing we're going to touch on here, the World Juniors are next week, I guess, Boxing Day. And they're in Sweden this year. And it was confirmed, even though he was injured, but it's confirmed he's going to play now, because Rutger McGroarty is the captain of Team USA at the upcoming World Juniors. That is honestly the least shocking news I've read in a long time. We all know how much of a character Rutger is, and it's honestly more shocking the fact that he's playing. Scott Wheeler on Winnipeg Sports Talk the other day he said that his injury was lung related. So he had a punctured lung and a broken rib. Everyone thought it was his back, because he fell back into the boards and hit his head. So I thought it was neck, back, something like that. But apparently it was his ribs. He must have I don't know. But anyways, it's great to see that he's healthy. He's ahead of schedule. He's going to captain the team. And he's going to play a massive role on, I'll say it right now, the gold medal winning Team USA. That team is absolutely loaded. I have not seen a top 9 that stacked in the World Juniors from Team USA in a long time. I'll preface that, because Canada last year was also pretty stacked with Bedard, but
they've had pretty stacked teams.
Team USA, their top 9 is just loaded. Their back end's good. Their goaltending is returning for a third straight year in Augustine. They're gonna be really, really good. But what are your guys' takeaways, if there are any, from McGroarty being captain?
Yeah, you said it where it's entirely unsurprising. So that's essentially where my mind was when I saw it. I wasn't shocked, but in any means whatsoever.
Yeah,
I think it's just good that he's playing. He was having a really good year with Michigan, which means that I think that he has an opportunity to get that same sort of call up towards the end of the year with the Moose, and potentially get some AHL games played. I don't know if the Moose will be in the playoffs race and in the playoffs like they were last year, but at least if he can get a call up, maybe get 5 games in, and we kind of get a sense of how he plays at the professional level. I think that's a huge thing, but I think it's just good for his development that this injury didn't put him out long term. Because was this technically draft year +1, and this is the most important year, if that's what or is it draft year +2? I can't remember.
Draft year +2. But yeah, usually draft year +1 is when some players will break out randomly. And then draft year +2 is when you really see if it was a fluke or not. And Rutger's been fantastic. I think he's a Jet next year. Honestly, I think he might, if Michigan gets eliminated early in the college playoffs. I don't even know.
Frozen Four.
The Frozen Four. You've seen it with Cale Makar. But maybe Rutger McGroarty comes in and plays a third line role with the Jets if they don't add any bottom 6 talent, right? Maybe he takes Appleton's spot and Appleton slides down. I think I've become a lot higher on Rutger McGroarty as a prospect. Selfishly, I'm glad he's healthy, because the World Juniors without him, as following the Jets would be a lot less entertaining. Now there are other players, and I'm excited to watch Elias Salomonsson and
None of them
Fabian
are
Wagner.
Canadian.
Yeah.
None of them are Canadian. Barlow did not make the team, but Barlow's injured. But Sweden, the host team, Elias Salomonsson is going to play a huge role for them. And we've heard a lot about, we interviewed Scott Wheeler and asked him about Elias Salomonsson in the summer before this season. And he said he's been fantastic. The World Juniors is when he was going to make a name for himself. Now is that time. He's going to play a big role. Sweden, host team. They have a lot of good defensemen on that team. Salomonsson has a chance to really solidify himself in the eyes of kind of the not national, but Jets fans that aren't tuning into Skellefteå League games, like no one's really watching.
Or like us and are complete nuts and follow every single Jets prospect and what they're doing.
We follow him, but I'm not going to sit here and act like I've watched a single one of his games this year. Like sure, he's been good. Scott Wheeler says he's been good. That's what Scott Wheeler's for. He's the draft guy. He knows everything. Like what he does is really impressive to know every team's like top prospects, not even top prospects. Elias Salomonson's like the 6th best prospect on the Jets, 5th. There's the 4 forwards ahead of him. Or maybe not. Maybe after this tournament, my mind will change on that. But
maybe
he's been apparently fantastic. So I'm excited to watch him as well. Fabian Wagner had a great tournament last year. Another year for him. But yeah, Rutger is the one I'm most excited to watch. I think that's it for Jets prospects at the World Juniors.
Yeah,
I believe so.
Yeah, it's just those 3. Yeah. Barlow had a chance, but he was been injured for a while now. And
DiVincentis also was.
DiVincentis last
got
cuts.
cut, right?
Yeah.
Right. Yes. Which, yeah, maybe next episode we'll get into more of a prospect recap because the World Juniors would be a good time. Or maybe following the World Junior tournament, we can really update how everyone's doing. DiVincentis specifically, I want to dive into because what's going on there. But yeah, unless you guys have anything else on the World Juniors, good to go. Yeah.
Good to go.
I think
All
we're
right.
good.
Episode 59 of the Level 5 podcast. Thank you for watching or tuning in on the podcast. Make sure you follow us on all socials at Level Flight WPG and join us next week for a holiday edition of the Level Flight podcast, episode 60. And the World Juniors. Enjoy. One more game. You'll be hearing this episode tomorrow. So this last game before the holiday break will be tonight against the Boston Bruins. Original 6 Friday night. Should be a fun night inside Canada Life Center. Grab tickets if you haven't, and you can. Going to be a good game to watch, I think.
Yeah.
So yeah, episode 59. Thanks for tuning in. From Brian, Elliott, and I, we really appreciate it. And join us next week for episode 60. Have a great week, everyone. Thanks for listening to episode 59 of the Level Flight podcast. See you.
See ya.
Peace.